A poor woman kisses a millionaire in front of his family at a bustling airport, unaware that the reason behind their connection will change both their lives forever. Emily Johnson had grown accustomed to the sounds of JFK Airport, the constant hum of announcements, the rumble of suitcases, and the chatter of voices in dozens of languages. It was a chaotic symphony that framed her days as a janitor, but she had learned to find a strange comfort in it. Every extra shift she worked was another step toward covering her mom's medical bills and saving for her younger brother Danny's future. That morning, Emily moved briskly through the bustling terminal, broom in hand. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with expensive colognes, while travelers rushed past her, pulling their suitcases and muttering hurried apologies. She was invisible to most, and she preferred it that way. At least, that's what she told herself. Across the city, Ryan Mitchell sat in the back seat of a sleek SUV, furiously replying to emails. At 30, he was the heir to the Mitchell Hotel's empire, a name synonymous with luxury. Today, he had to attend a high-profile gala organized by his sister, Sophie. It was yet another event where the Mitchells had to dazzle investors, and Ryan's presence was non-negotiable. "You have to be there, Ryan. Perception matters," Sophie had said earlier, her voice sharp. He had no choice but to oblige. His life was a carefully orchestrated performance, filled with expectations and polished smiles. As the SUV pulled up to JFK, Ryan sighed. His private flight to Boston was in an hour, but he first had to navigate the airport chaos. Emily was finishing up near Gate 7 when something on the floor caught her eye, a sleek leather wallet. It was expensive looking and packed with credit cards and cash. Her heart raced as she picked it up. Stories of people pocketing such finds instantly came to mind. "That's not me," she thought, walking quickly toward the information desk. Before she could hand it over, a voice called out, "Excuse me." It was firm yet polite. Emily turned to see a tall man in a sharp suit rushing toward her. "I think you have something of mine," he said, catching his breath. "Is this yours?" Emily asked, holding up the wallet. "Yes, it must have fallen when I was sitting here," he replied, relief evident in his expression. Emily hesitated for a moment, then handed it over. "Be more careful next time," she said, crossing her arms defensively. Ryan opened the wallet, confirming everything was intact. "Thank you so much. You have no idea how much I appreciate this." "It's nothing," she replied, looking away. "Just doing the right thing." Ryan lingered, studying her. Most people would have asked for something in return, but not her. She was different, simple, sincere. "Can I offer you a reward?" he asked, pulling out a bill. "No, thanks." Emily shook her head. "I have to get back to work." Before Ryan could respond, she turned and walked back to her cleaning cart. He stood there, watching her fade into the crowd. As Emily returned to work, her face flushed. She shook her head, dismissing the stranger. "Just another passenger," she muttered. For Ryan, it was something more. He had encountered someone who wasn't interested in his money or status, and it left him unexpectedly curious. Ryan couldn't shake the memory of the woman at the airport. Her honesty and complete disinterest in his wealth had left an impression. It was rare to meet someone like her, someone who wasn't trying to gain something from him. As he sat in his office the next day, reviewing endless reports, his thoughts kept drifting back to her. By mid-afternoon, he made a decision. Ryan cleared his schedule and returned to JFK, determined to thank her properly. He had no real plan, only a vague hope of finding her during her shift. Walking through the bustling terminal, he scanned the crowd for any sign of her. Emily, meanwhile, was back at work, avoiding questions from her co-workers. Word had spread about her brief interaction with a wealthy man, and the gossip was relentless. "Emily's got a secret admirer," one colleague teased, earning a sharp glare in return. As Emily wiped down a row of seats, a familiar voice startled her. "Excuse me," Ryan said, his tone calm yet purposeful. She turned to find him standing there, hands in his pockets. You again, she said, surprised. I wanted to thank you, properly this time, Ryan replied. Can I buy you a cup of coffee? Emily hesitated. I'm working. Maybe after your shift, he pressed. Just a quick coffee. No strings attached. She studied him for a moment. Against her better judgment, she nodded. Fine. One coffee. A small smile played on his lips. I'll wait. Ryan led Emily to a small cafe just outside the terminal. It was far from the luxurious spots he frequented, but it felt fitting, unpretentious and quiet. They sat by the window, the sounds of the bustling airport fading into the background. So, Ryan began, tell me about yourself. Emily raised an eyebrow. What do you want to know? Anything, he said, genuinely curious. You seem different. She laughed softly, a mix of humor and disbelief. Different how? Honest. Grounded, he replied. Most people would have kept that wallet or expected something in return. Doing the right thing shouldn't be different, she said simply, sipping her coffee. Ryan leaned forward, intrigued by her straightforwardness. What brought you to JFK? Emily hesitated, but decided to answer honestly. My mom's sick and my brother's still in high school. This job pays the bills. It's not glamorous, but it's steady. Ryan nodded, impressed by her resilience. That's a lot of responsibility. It is, she admitted, her voice steady. But I don't have a choice. Their conversation flowed easily, despite their vastly different worlds. Emily found herself relaxing, drawn to Ryan's genuine interest. For his part, Ryan couldn't remember the last time he'd enjoyed such a sincere exchange. As they finished their coffee, Emily glanced at the time. I should get back. Ryan stood with her, pulling out his wallet. This one's on me. She smiled faintly. Thanks. Ryan, right? Right, he said. Please, she remembered. And you're Emily. With a nod, she disappeared back into the crowd, leaving Ryan wondering when he'd see her again. The terminal buzzed with activity, but Emily couldn't escape the murmurs around her. Her colleagues had noticed her leaving with Ryan the day before, and the gossip machine was in full swing. Emily, is it true you went out with that rich guy? One co-worker asked, leaning on her mop. Emily kept her head down, focusing on wiping the counter in front of her. We just had coffee. It's nothing. Nothing? A guy like that doesn't have coffee with just anyone. Another chimed in, smirking. Emily felt her cheeks flush. She hated being the center of attention, especially over something that felt so trivial. It's not a big deal, she muttered, hurrying to finish her task. Still, the whispers followed her throughout the day, making her question if agreeing to meet Ryan had been a mistake. She needed this job, and the last thing she wanted was for people to think she was distracted, or worse, looking for a way out through him. Meanwhile, Ryan couldn't get Emily out of his mind. Back in his office, he found himself replaying their conversation. Her honesty and strength left him wanting to know more, but he also knew pursuing her could complicate things. As he stared at his phone, debating whether to call her, his sister Sophie barged into his office. Ryan, we need to talk, she announced, her tone sharp. What's this I hear about you spending time with some janitor? Ryan's jaw tightened. It's none of your business, Sophie. Her eyes narrowed. It becomes my business when it risks the family name. Sophie's words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Ryan leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. What exactly do you think you know? I know enough, Sophie replied coolly. People are talking, Ryan. Do you understand how this looks? To whom? You. Ryan shot back, his irritation clear. To everyone, she snapped. You're the face of Mitchell Hotels. You can't afford scandals, especially with someone so beneath us. Ryan stood, his patience wearing thin. Emily isn't a scandal. She's a good person. Maybe you should try talking to her before jumping to conclusions. Sophie's expression didn't soften. Ryan, this isn't about her being a good person. It's about perception. You know how investors are. They scrutinize everything. Ryan sighed, running a hand through his hair. I'm not living my life based on what investors think. Emily isn't some plot to ruin the family's reputation. Sophie stepped closer, lowering her voice. This isn't just about you. It's about all of us. You have responsibilities, Ryan, whether you like it or not. I'm aware of my responsibilities, Ryan said firmly. But I won't let you or anyone else dictate who I spend time with. Sophie frowned, but Ryan's resolve was clear. Fine, she said at last, though her tone carried a warning. But don't say I didn't warn you. As she left, Ryan sat back down, frustration boiling beneath the surface. He didn't regret meeting Emily, but he knew Sophie wouldn't let this go. Emily's shift ended, but the tension from her day clung to her like a shadow. The whispers, the lingering stares, she could handle those. What truly bothered her was a nagging thought that Ryan's world wasn't one she could ever fit into. She walked home to her small apartment in Brooklyn, the streets alive with the chatter of families and the aroma of food from corner diners. Inside, her brother Danny sat at the kitchen table, bent over his school books. How was work? He asked, glancing up. Emily hesitated, setting her bag down. Fine, she replied quickly. Danny wasn't convinced. You sure? You look distracted. It's nothing, she said, forcing a smile. Just a long day. Danny shrugged and returned to his homework, but Emily's thoughts remained heavy. Could she risk getting close to someone like Ryan? What if his world chewed her up and spat her out? Worse, what if she dragged her family into the chaos? Meanwhile, Ryan stared out the window of his Manhattan apartment, the city's lights twinkling in the distance. His conversation with Sophie still lingered in his mind, but so did the memory of Emily. He didn't care about perceptions or expectations, but he knew Emily might. He had seen the hesitance in her eyes, the way she guarded herself. Ryan picked up his phone, considering texting her, but decided against it. Both of them were caught in the same whirlwind of doubt, unsure of how, or if, they could bridge the gap between their worlds. The next day, Emily resolved to keep her head down at work. Avoiding drama was her best option, and she intended to stick to it. But fate had other plans. As she swept near the terminal's coffee kiosk, she heard a familiar voice. Emily? She turned, startled, to find Ryan standing a few feet away. He wasn't dressed in his usual sharp suit, but in a casual sweater and jeans. He looked approachable. Ryan, she said, blinking in surprise. What are you doing here? Flying to Boston for a meeting, he replied, a small smile tugging at his lips. But I thought I'd grab coffee first. Care to join me? Emily hesitated. I'm working. On your break, then, he offered. She glanced at the clock. Her break was in 10 minutes. Against her better judgment, she nodded. Okay, just for a little while. When her break came, she joined Ryan at the same cafe they'd visited before. This time, their conversation felt easier, more natural. He asked about her family, and she shared snippets about Danny and her mom. You take on a lot, Ryan said, admiration clear in his tone. Emily shrugged. I do what I have to. As they talked, she found herself relaxing, forgetting the whispers and the doubts. For a moment, it was just them, two people connecting in a world that rarely slowed down. But as their time together ended, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that this fragile connection was both a blessing and a risk. Sophie Mitchell rarely left anything to chance. Ryan's growing interest in Emily had unsettled her, and she wasn't about to sit idly by while her brother jeopardized their family's reputation. In her sleek Manhattan office, Sophie sat behind her desk, scrolling through a private investigator's preliminary report on Emily Johnson. It wasn't much, basic details about her job at JFK, her small apartment in Brooklyn, and her family. A janitor with a sick mother and a teenage brother, Sophie murmured to herself. She leaned back in her chair, tapping her manicured nails on the desk. Exactly the kind of person who might see Ryan as a ticket out of her situation. Despite the sparse details, Sophie's mind raced with possibilities. Was Emily genuinely interested in Ryan, or was she playing the long game? Sophie wasn't willing to take any chances. She dialed her assistant. Find out everything there is to know about Emily Johnson. Friends, family, finances, everything. Yes, Ms. Mitchell, the assistant replied. Sophie hung up, satisfied. She would protect the Mitchell legacy, even if it meant exposing Emily for who she believed she truly was. Meanwhile, Ryan was oblivious to his sister's meddling. He was busy wrapping up meetings in Boston, but couldn't stop thinking about Emily. He didn't care what Sophie thought, but he knew Emily wouldn't appreciate the scrutiny. He'd have to tread carefully if he wanted to keep their fragile connection intact. Back in Brooklyn, Emily was folding laundry while Danny worked on a school project. The simple routine brought her comfort, grounding her amidst the chaos of her thoughts. Have you talked to him? Danny asked casually, not looking up. Who? Emily replied, feigning ignorance. Danny smirked. The guy from the airport. Ryan, right? Emily sighed. We had coffee again today. That's all. Danny raised an eyebrow. Sounds like more than just coffee. It's nothing serious, she insisted. We're from two completely different worlds, Danny. It'll never work. Maybe you should let yourself be happy for once, he said, his tone softening. You don't have to carry everything alone. His words lingered as Emily finished her chores. Was it selfish to enjoy Ryan's company, even if it couldn't last? The next morning, Ryan texted her for the first time. Good morning. Coffee again sometime. Emily stared at the message, her heart racing. Part of her wanted to say yes, but doubts crept in. Still, before she could overthink, she typed back. Sure. Their bond, though tentative, was growing. But Emily couldn't shake the sense that their connection was fragile, teetering on the edge of something neither of them could fully control. Sophie leaned back in her chair, examining the detailed report now in her hands. The private investigator had done their job well. Every aspect of Emily's life was laid bare. Her modest income, her mother's medical debts, and Danny's plans for college. This is exactly what I needed, Sophie muttered, her eyes narrowing. She wasn't looking for facts. She was searching for leverage. That evening, she arranged a private meeting with Ryan. He arrived at her penthouse, suspicious of her sudden invitation. What's this about, Sophie? He asked, crossing his arms. Sophie slid the report across the table. It's about Emily. Ryan glanced at the papers but didn't pick them up. You had her investigated? Of course I did, Sophie said unapologetically. This girl isn't who you think she is, Ryan. Her family's drowning in debt, and she's struggling to make ends meet. It's only a matter of time before she starts asking for your help. Ryan's jaw tightened. Emily's never asked me for anything. She's not like that. Sophie smirked. Maybe not yet. But how well do you really know her? Ryan pushed the report aside. I don't need your approval, Sophie. Stay out of it. Her expression hardened. I'm protecting you and this family. If you can't see that, then you're blind. Ryan left without another word, his frustration boiling. He trusted Emily. But Sophie's words planted a seed of doubt he couldn't ignore. Emily welcomed her day off with relief. She needed time to clear her head, away from the constant buzz of the airport and the lingering whispers. Walking through the park near her apartment, she found solace in the crisp autumn air. The golden leaves crunched under her boots as she followed a winding path, her thoughts wandering. Her phone buzzed. It was Ryan. What are you up to today? Emily hesitated before replying. Just taking a walk. You. Busy morning, but I could use some fresh air too. Want company? She considered saying no but typed. Sure. I'm at McCarran Park. When Ryan arrived, his usual polished demeanor seemed softer. He wore a simple jacket and jeans, blending into the surroundings. Nice spot, he said, walking beside her. It's peaceful, Emily replied, her tone relaxed. They strolled in silence for a while. the rhythm of their steps matching. Emily shared bits of her life, her favorite childhood memories, her mom's strength despite her illness. Ryan listened intently, appreciating the openness she offered. "You carry a lot on your shoulders," he said after a while. Emily shrugged. "It's just life. You deal with what you're given." Ryan admired her resilience. For someone who had faced so much, she carried herself with grace. As they parted ways that afternoon, Emily realized that spending time with Ryan felt natural, even comforting. But the weight of their differences remained, lurking just beneath the surface. The following day, Emily returned to work, bracing herself for another long shift at JFK. The moment she stepped into the terminal, she could feel the shift in the air. Her co-workers weren't just whispering, they were outright staring. "Looks like you've got yourself a boyfriend," a colleague teased, smirking as Emily walked past. "I saw them walking in the park together," another chimed in. Emily's face burned, but she kept her focus on her tasks. Ignoring them was the only way she knew to survive the constant speculation. Meanwhile, Ryan was equally unaware of how quickly the whispers had spread. Back in his office, he was busy catching up on emails when Sophie barged in unannounced, her expression triumphant. "Ryan," she said sharply, throwing a tablet onto his desk. On the screen was a tabloid article. "Mitchell Air spotted with mystery woman. Is love in the air?" Ryan's brows furrowed as he skimmed the article. The photos showed him and Emily walking in the park, smiling and talking. "This is what I was warning you about," Sophie snapped. "Do you have any idea how damaging this could be?" Ryan clenched his jaw. "Damaging to who? You? Or your obsession with appearances?" Sophie glared at him. "You think this ends here? You're delusional if you think the media won't dig deeper." Ryan stood, his voice calm but firm. "Timda, I'm not ashamed of Emily." For the first time, Sophie faltered. "Then you better hope she's worth it." By the end of her shift, Emily felt utterly drained. The gossip, the stares, it was too much. She barely made it home before collapsing onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. Danny peeked out from his room, concern etched on his face. "Em, you okay?" She sighed. Sitting up, "It's just everything. Work, mom, and now all this nonsense about Ryan." Danny sat beside her. "People are going to talk. Let them. You've done nothing wrong." Emily shook her head. "It's not just the talking, Danny. It's the attention. I don't want it, and I don't want to drag Ryan into this mess." Danny frowned. "If he really cares about you, he won't see it as a mess." Before Emily could respond, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Ryan. "I saw the article. I'm sorry. Let's talk." Emily hesitated. Part of her wanted to ignore him, to protect herself from the storm brewing around them. But she knew she owed him an explanation. "Okay, tomorrow?" she replied, her heart heavy with uncertainty. The next day, when they met at their usual cafe, Ryan was waiting, his expression serious. "I'm sorry you're being dragged into this," he began. "It's not your fault," Emily said, though her voice was strained. "But it's a lot. I don't know if I can handle it." Ryan reached for her hand across the table. "You don't have to handle it alone. We'll figure this out together." Emily wanted to believe him, but the weight of their worlds felt heavier than ever. Emily left the cafe feeling more conflicted than ever. Ryan's words echoed in her mind. "We'll figure this out together." He seemed so sure, so willing to take on whatever challenges came their way. But was she ready to do the same? As she walked back to her apartment, the reality of her life loomed large. Bills were piling up, her mother's health wasn't improving, and Danny's future depended on her. Could she really afford to be distracted by Ryan and the chaos that followed him? At home, Danny was waiting for her, poring over college brochures. He looked up with a hopeful smile. "Hey, Em, check this out. NYU has a great engineering program." Emily mustered a smile. "That's a big dream, Danny." He nodded. "I know, but I've been researching scholarships. It's possible. Her heart ached. She wanted nothing more than to see him succeed, but the weight of their financial struggles felt suffocating. That night, Emily lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Ryan's kindness and sincerity had touched her, but her responsibilities were a constant reminder of why she couldn't let herself get too close. Across the city, Ryan sat in his penthouse, staring at his phone. He could sense Emily's hesitation and knew she was pulling away. But he wasn't ready to give up. Tomorrow, he thought, I'll show her she's not in this alone. The next morning, Emily arrived at work, determined to focus on her job. But as she entered the terminal, she stopped in her tracks. Standing near the information desk was Ryan, holding 2 cups of coffee. His casual smile disarmed her. "Ryan," she said, glancing around nervously, "what are you doing here?" "Bringing you coffee," he replied, handing her one of the cups. "You mentioned you like hazelnut." Emily hesitated, feeling the weight of every curious glance from her co-workers. "You didn't have to come all the way here." "I wanted to," he said simply. "I figured we could talk during your break." She sighed, torn between gratitude and frustration. "Ryan, people are already talking. You showing up here isn't helping." "I don't care what they say," he said, his voice steady. "I care about you." The sincerity in his eyes made her heart skip a beat. But instead of feeling reassured, it only deepened her anxiety. "Ryan, this isn't your world," she said softly. "And it's definitely not mine." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Maybe it can be ours." Before Emily could respond, her supervisor appeared, clearing his throat. "Johnson, break time's over." Emily nodded quickly, avoiding Ryan's gaze. As she walked away, her emotions swirled. She appreciated his efforts, but she couldn't ignore the complications they brought. Ryan watched her go, his resolve stronger than ever. If winning her trust meant facing the whispers and the stares, he was ready for the fight. Emily's shift dragged on, her thoughts constantly circling back to Ryan. His persistence was both frustrating and heartwarming, but it also terrified her. She couldn't afford distractions, and she certainly couldn't afford to hope for something that felt impossible. That evening, she returned home to find Danny cooking dinner. "Hey, you're back late," he said, stirring a pot of spaghetti. "Long day," Emily replied, sinking into a chair. Danny glanced at her, sensing her unease. Was it about him? Emily groaned. "Danny, not everything is about Ryan." He smirked. "You didn't deny it, though." She shot him a look, but couldn't help smiling faintly. "He showed up at work today. With coffee." Danny raised an eyebrow. "That's kind of romantic." "It's complicated," Emily said, her tone turning serious. "He doesn't understand what he's getting into. And honestly, I don't think I do either." Danny set down the spoon and sat across from her. "You've spent your whole life putting everyone else first. Maybe it's okay to let someone care about you for a change." Emily blinked, his words hitting harder than she expected. "It's not that simple." "Nothing ever is," Danny said with a shrug. "But it doesn't mean it's not worth it." Later that night, as Emily lay in bed, she couldn't shake the thought. Could Danny be right? Sophie wasn't one to back down easily. Despite Ryan's insistence that she stay out of his personal life, she felt justified in her actions. Protecting the family's image was non-negotiable. That morning, she met with her private investigator again. "What else do you have on Emily Johnson?" Sophie asked, her tone sharp. The investigator handed her a new file. "Not much more than before. She's clean. No criminal record. No significant debts beyond her mother's medical expenses." Sophie frowned. "There's always something. Keep digging." She flipped through the file, stopping at a photo of Emily and Danny outside their apartment. Sophie's lips curled into a smirk. "Her brother. He's applying to colleges, isn't he?" "Yes," the investigator confirmed. "Seems like a smart kid." Sophie tapped the photo thoughtfully. "Find out where he's applying. Maybe we can assist." The investigator hesitated. Assist how? Sophie smiled coldly. By making sure the right doors open or close. Let's see how much Emily values her brother's future. Across town, Ryan was oblivious to Sophie's plans. He was busy drafting a proposal for a new hotel branch, but his thoughts kept drifting to Emily. He knew she was scared, and he understood why. But he was determined to prove that he wasn't going anywhere. Little did he know, Sophie's interference was about to make everything infinitely harder for them both. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She noticed more whispers at work, more sidelong glances, and even the occasional smirk from her co-workers. She had learned to brush off gossip, but this felt different, like it had grown teeth. At home, Danny was unusually quiet. Normally, he would chatter about his college plans or ask her about work, but tonight he seemed distracted. "Everything okay?" Emily asked, setting down her bag. Danny hesitated, then handed her an envelope. "This came in the mail today. It's from one of the colleges I applied to." Emily opened the letter and scanned it quickly. Her stomach tightened. "A scholarship offer?" Danny nodded, but his expression was far from joyful. "It's weird, though. I didn't even know I was being considered for this one." Emily frowned, rereading the letter. It seemed too good to be true. Full tuition, housing, even a stipend for books. "Danny, this is incredible. Why aren't you excited?" "I don't know," he admitted. "It just doesn't feel real." "Like, why me?" Emily's instincts told her something wasn't right, but she forced a smile. "Maybe it's because you're brilliant and they saw that." Danny nodded, but Emily couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that this wasn't a coincidence. Meanwhile, Ryan tried to reach Emily, but her responses were brief, almost distant. He sensed her pulling away, but he wasn't sure how to stop it. Sophie smiled as she reviewed the scholarship letter. Everything was going according to plan. She had made a few calls, ensuring that Danny's application landed on the right desk. Now, all she had to do was wait. She knew Emily wouldn't take long to connect the dots. The moment Emily realized the scholarship was orchestrated, Sophie would have her leverage. Later that day, Sophie met Ryan for lunch at a quiet, upscale restaurant. He arrived late, his mood distant. "Ryan," Sophie began, her tone overly casual. "You've been distracted lately. Still seeing what's her name? Emily?" Ryan's jaw tightened. "Yes, Sophie. And her name isn't something you need to mock." Sophie raised an eyebrow. "Relax. I'm just asking. But you should know, the media is still interested in this little situation of yours." "I don't care about the media," Ryan replied firmly. "Maybe you should," Sophie said, leaning forward. "Ryan, you're risking everything for someone who isn't even in your world. Think about that." Ryan stood abruptly, tossing his napkin onto the table. "I've thought about it, Sophie, and if you keep meddling, I'll make sure you regret it." As he stormed out, Sophie's smirk didn't falter. She had planted enough seeds to stir trouble. Now, she just had to wait for them to grow. Emily sat at the kitchen table, staring at Danny's scholarship letter. Something about it gnawed at her. It wasn't that she doubted Danny's abilities. He was more than capable of earning such an opportunity. But the timing felt too convenient, especially given the growing attention around her connection to Ryan. "Have you told anyone about this?" she asked Danny, her tone cautious. "Just you," he replied, looking puzzled. "Why?" Emily hesitated, not wanting to alarm him. "No reason. It's a big deal. I want to make sure everything's legit." Danny shrugged. "They probably just saw my grades and figured I'd be a good candidate. Why overthink it?" Emily forced a smile, but her unease lingered. She couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't random, that someone might be pulling strings. At work, she found herself distracted, replaying conversations in her head. Her co-workers had stopped whispering, but now openly speculated about her relationship with Ryan. Every time his name was mentioned, her anxiety grew. That evening, she texted Ryan, "Can we talk? I need to ask you something. His response came quickly. Of course. When? Emily sighed, unsure of what she even wanted to say. The gap between their worlds seemed to widen with each passing day, and she wasn't sure she could bridge it. The next afternoon, Ryan met Emily at their usual cafe. She looked tense, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee cup. "What's on your mind?" he asked gently. Emily hesitated, then pulled out Danny's scholarship letter and slid it across the table. "Do you know anything about this?" Ryan's brows furrowed as he read the letter. "No. Should I?" "I don't know," Emily said, her voice strained. "It just feels strange, like someone's trying to help us without saying why." Ryan's expression darkened as realization dawned. "This has Sophie written all over it." Emily's heart sank. "Sophie?" He nodded. "She's been meddling ever since she found out about us. She probably arranged this to make you feel indebted or to push you away." Emily's stomach churned. "I don't need charity, Ryan. And I definitely don't need your sister controlling my life." "She's overstepping and I'll handle it," Ryan said firmly. "But please, don't let her ruin what we have." Emily looked away, her emotions swirling. "I don't know if I can do this, Ryan. Your world, it's too much." Ryan reached for her hand, his voice steady. "Emily, you're not alone in this. I'm with you, but you have to trust me." She met his gaze, wanting to believe him, but unsure she could withstand the storm Sophie had unleashed. Ryan didn't waste time after his conversation with Emily. The moment he left the cafe, he called Sophie and demanded to meet. By the time he arrived at her penthouse, his anger was barely contained. "Sophie," he said, his voice sharp as he walked into the immaculate living room, "we need to talk. Now." Sophie barely looked up from her tablet, feigning indifference. "Always so dramatic, Ryan. What is it this time?" "Don't play dumb," he snapped. "Did you have anything to do with Danny's scholarship?" Her smirk gave her away. "What if I did? Isn't it a good thing? Helping the boy get an education." Ryan's fist clenched. "Helping? You're manipulating. You're using her family to control her. Do you have any idea what kind of pressure you're putting on Emily?" Sophie set her tablet aside and stood, her demeanor icy. "I know exactly what I'm doing. Unlike you, I'm thinking ahead. This girl doesn't belong in your life, Ryan. She's going to drag you down, and I won't let that happen." Ryan stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "This stops now, Sophie. You stay out of Emily's life and her family's, or so help me. I'll walk away from everything. The business, the name, all of it." Sophie blinked, startled by the intensity of his threat. "You wouldn't dare." "Try me," Ryan said, turning to leave. "And don't say I didn't warn you." Meanwhile, Emily sat in her small apartment, staring at the scholarship letter. She wanted to believe it was a genuine opportunity. But Ryan's confirmation of Sophie's interference left her conflicted. Danny walked into the room, holding 2 bowls of cereal. "Dinner," he joked, placing one in front of her. "Thanks," Emily said quietly. Danny frowned, sensing her unease. "What's wrong?" She hesitated before answering. "Danny, about that scholarship, I think Sophie Mitchell might have been behind it." Danny's face fell. "Ryan's sister? Why would she do that?" "To push me away from Ryan," Emily admitted, "or to make me feel like I owe her something." Danny was silent for a moment before speaking. "Does it matter? If it helps us, why not take it?" Emily shook her head. "Because it's not real. It's a trap, Danny, and I can't let her use us like this." Danny leaned back, frustrated. "Emily, I get it, but maybe you're overthinking. If this can help us, why not take the chance?" Her heart ached at his words. She didn't want to ruin his future, but she couldn't let Sophie manipulate their lives. Later that night, Emily called Ryan. When he answered, she whispered, "I think we need to take a break." Ryan's heart sank. "Emily, don't do this." "I need time," she said, tears in her voice. "I'm sorry, Ryan." As she hung up, Emily felt a heaviness settle over her. For the first time, she truly wondered if their worlds were just too far apart. Ryan sat alone in his apartment, the city lights casting a faint glow through the glass windows. Emily's words echoed in his mind. "I think we need to take a break." He wasn't angry with her. He understood why she felt overwhelmed. Sophie's interference, the scrutiny, the relentless whispers. But he couldn't accept that this was the end. The next morning, Ryan made a decision. He called his assistant, canceling all meetings for the day. He needed to focus on what mattered most, proving to Emily that they could make it work. His first stop was at the Mitchell Hotel's headquarters. Sophie wasn't expecting him, but that didn't stop him from barging into her office. "Sophie, enough is enough," he said firmly. She looked up, annoyed. "Ryan, I'm in the middle of something." "This is important," he replied. "I'm done letting you interfere with my life." Sophie sighed dramatically. "Ryan, I was trying to protect you." "No, you were trying to control me," he snapped. "And it stops now. Stay out of Emily's life, or there will be consequences." Sophie's smirk faltered, but she didn't argue. Ryan turned and left without another word, feeling a newfound sense of purpose. Later that afternoon, he sent Emily a simple text. "I'm not giving up on us. Take all the time you need, but I'll be here when you're ready." Emily read Ryan's message over and over, her emotions a tangled web of gratitude, fear, and guilt. She cared for him deeply, but every step closer to his world seemed to pull her further from the life she'd worked so hard to hold together. At work, the whispers had quieted, but the weight of judgment still lingered. Her co-workers had shifted from mocking to watching, their curiosity more unnerving than their teasing. That evening, Emily sat at the kitchen table with Danny. "I told Ryan we needed a break," she said quietly. Danny looked up from his notebook, surprised. "Why, you like him, don't you?" "It's not that simple," Emily replied, her voice heavy. "Sophie is doing everything she can to push me out, and I don't know if I can keep fighting." Danny frowned. "But you've always fought for us, Em. Why not fight for yourself this time?" Emily blinked back tears, his words cutting deeper than she expected. She wanted to fight, but she wasn't sure if she could win this battle. Later, as she lay in bed, her phone buzzed with another message from Ryan. "No pressure, just know I'm thinking of you." Her heart ached. She wanted to respond, to tell him she felt the same, but fear held her back. For now, all she could do was hope that time would bring clarity to the storm in her heart. Ryan knew words alone wouldn't be enough to reassure Emily. If he wanted to prove his commitment, he had to show her, through action, that she mattered more than the opinions of others or the expectations of his family. After some thought, he decided on something personal, something that would remind Emily of the woman he admired so deeply. The next morning, he went to a local art studio and commissioned a simple but meaningful project. By late afternoon, he arrived at Emily's apartment. Danny answered the door, his eyes widening in surprise. "Ryan?" he asked, glancing back toward Emily's room. Ryan smiled, holding up a small wrapped box. "Is she home?" Danny nodded, stepping aside. "Ing, someone's here for you." Emily appeared in the doorway, her expression shifting from surprise to uncertainty. "Ryan, what are you doing here?" "I wanted to give you something," he said, handing her the box. Emily hesitated before unwrapping it. Inside was a small, framed sketch of her and Danny, based on a photo Ryan had seen on her phone. Beneath it, a simple inscription read, "Your strength inspires me." Her breath caught. "Ryan, it's beautiful." "I meant every word," he said softly. "You've carried so much alone, Emily. Let me help you carry it." Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them away. "Ryan, I don't know if this changes anything." "It doesn't have to," he replied. "I just wanted you to know how I feel." For the first time in days, Emily allowed herself to smile. Sophie paced her office, frustrated by Ryan's unwavering defiance. Her attempts to distance him from Emily had failed, and now she was running out of options. She called her assistant into the room, tapping a folder on her desk. "Did we find anything else on Emily Johnson?" The assistant shook her head. "Nothing incriminating, Ms. Mitchell. She's clean." Sophie's jaw tightened. "Everyone has something. Keep looking." Later that evening, she attended a charity gala, an event crawling with influential people from the business world. As she sipped her champagne, an idea began to form. If she couldn't dig up dirt on Emily, she would create a narrative. Sophie approached a well-known columnist, leaning in conspiratorially. "Have you heard about Ryan's new interest?" she began, her tone dripping with feigned concern. The columnist raised an eyebrow. "I've heard whispers." "What's the story?" Sophie sighed dramatically. "It's complicated. This girl, Emily, has a difficult past. Lots of financial trouble, a brother depending on her. You can imagine how that might influence her intentions." The columnist's eyes gleamed with interest. "Do tell." Sophie smiled, knowing she'd planted the seed. She didn't need to fabricate anything outright, just suggest enough to make Emily look questionable in the public eye. Satisfied, Sophie returned home, convinced she had finally found a way to end this once and for all. Emily's phone buzzed relentlessly as she walked into work. Messages from co-workers, acquaintances, and even distant friends flooded her inbox. At first, she ignored them, but the growing murmurs in the terminal told her something was wrong. "Emily," one of her colleagues whispered, gesturing to a news app on their phone. "Have you seen this?" Reluctantly, Emily leaned in. Her stomach dropped as she read the headline. "Mitchell Ayers Mystery Woman. Is she playing the long game?" Beneath it was a photo of her and Ryan in the park, alongside paragraphs speculating about her family's financial struggles and her intentions. Her hands shook as she backed away, her mind racing. She barely made it through her shift, and by the time she got home, Danny was waiting, looking worried. It's everywhere," he said, holding up his own phone. "I know," she muttered, sinking onto the couch. Danny frowned. "What are you going to do?" Emily buried her face in her hands. "I don't know. How do you fight something like this?" Meanwhile, Ryan sat in his office, furious as he read the article. He didn't need to ask who was behind it. Sophie's fingerprints were all over this. He called Emily immediately. "Emily, I'm so sorry," he said when she answered. "I'll fix this, I promise." "You can't fix this, Ryan," she said, her voice cracking. "It's my life they're tearing apart, not yours." "Then let me stand by you," he insisted. Emily didn't respond, her silence hanging heavily between them. Ryan wasted no time confronting Sophie. He stormed into her office, the tabloid in hand. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, slamming it onto her desk. Sophie glanced at the headline, feigning innocence. "Oh, that? Just some gossip. You know how the media can be." Ryan's glare darkened. "Don't lie to me, Sophie. You planted this story." She leaned back in her chair, unbothered. "And if I did? I'm protecting you, Ryan. You're too blind to see what she's doing." "She's not doing anything," he snapped. "You're the one destroying people's lives to get what you want." Sophie's expression hardened. "Do you even hear yourself? You're risking everything for someone who doesn't belong in our world." Ryan shook his head. "No, Sophie. You're risking everything. Our family's reputation, our business, by turning this into a circus. You think this makes us look strong? It makes us look cruel." Sophie stood, her calm facade cracking. "You're blinded by her, Ryan. She'll never be more than a liability." Ryan stepped closer, his voice low and firm. "The only liability here is you. If you don't back off, I'll make sure everyone knows what you've done. And trust me, Sophie, you won't walk away unscathed." Her confidence faltered, but she quickly masked it. "You're making a mistake, Ryan." "No," he said, turning to leave. "The mistake was ever trusting you." Emily woke up the next morning, still reeling from the media storm. She had spent the night wrestling with anger, humiliation, and a deep sense of injustice. But as the sunlight streamed into her small apartment, a new emotion took over: determination. She couldn't let Sophie or anyone else define her story. If they wanted to talk about her, then they would hear the truth. Danny watched as Emily brewed coffee, her movements precise but tense. "You okay?" he asked hesitantly. "No," she admitted, setting down her mug. "But I'm not going to sit here and let them tear me apart." "What are you going to do?" Emily took a deep breath. "I'm going to tell my side of the story." She spent the morning drafting a statement, pouring her heart into every word. It wasn't an attack or a defense. It was a simple, honest account of her life and the challenges she had faced. Later that day, she emailed the statement to a local journalist she trusted, attaching a note. "This is who I am. The rest is just noise." When she hit send, her chest felt lighter. She didn't know what would come of it, but at least she had taken a step toward reclaiming her narrative. Meanwhile, Ryan received a message from Emily. "I've decided to speak out. I hope you understand." He replied instantly, "I'm proud of you. Whatever happens, I'm here." For the first time in days, Emily allowed herself to smile. 2 days later, Emily's statement was published. The article, titled in her own words, "Emily Johnson Breaks Her Silence," spread quickly across social media. In it, Emily described her journey, her family struggles, her mother's illness, her dreams for her brother Danny, and her decision to work at JFK to support them. She didn't address the rumors directly, but instead focused on who she was and what she stood for. At the airport, her co-workers approached her with a mix of admiration and apologies. "You really showed them, Emily," one said, clapping her on the back. Emily smiled faintly, relieved to feel some of the tension lift. Across town, Ryan read the article with a mix of pride and sadness. He knew how difficult it had been for Emily to share her story, but her strength only deepened his admiration for her. Sophie, however, was less than thrilled. She slammed her tablet onto her desk after reading the article. "Unbelievable," she muttered, pacing her office. Her assistant hesitated at the doorway. "Ms. Mitchell, there's been a lot of positive feedback about the article. People are calling it inspiring." Sophie shot him a sharp look. "Inspiring? It's a distraction. This doesn't change anything." But deep down, she knew her plan had backfired. Emily had turned public opinion in her favor, and Ryan's resolve was stronger than ever. As the world reacted to Emily's story, she realized that taking control of her life was just the first step. The real fight was only beginning. Emily's story created ripples far beyond what she had imagined. Social media buzzed with praise for her courage and honesty. Strangers left comments of support, sharing their own stories of resilience. "You're trending," Danny said one evening, holding up his phone with a grin. Emily rolled her eyes. "Great, just what I wanted." He laughed. "Seriously, people are rooting for you. You've turned this around." At work, her colleagues treated her differently. The usual whispers had been replaced with admiration. A supervisor even complimented her, saying, "We're proud to have someone like you on our team." But Emily's relief was mixed with caution. She knew this moment wouldn't last forever, especially with Sophie still looming in the background. Meanwhile, Ryan found himself fielding questions from investors and board members about the article. Most were supportive, but a few raised concerns about how the publicity might affect the Mitchell brand. "You don't need to worry," Ryan assured them during a meeting. "Emily's story isn't a liability. It's an example of integrity and resilience, values our company stands for." Privately, Ryan felt a renewed sense of determination. Emily's strength had inspired him to confront his own fears, especially those tied to his family's expectations. Sophie, however, wasn't done. She met with her public relations team, demanding they shift the narrative. "We can't let this spiral out of control," she insisted. "Spin it. Make it about the Mitchell family, not her." As the world rallied around Emily, Sophie's desperation grew. Sophie's frustration boiled over as every attempt to regain control seemed to fail. Emily's statement had not only softened public opinion, but also strengthened Ryan's resolve. At a private family dinner, Sophie made her move. The room was quiet as she clinked her glass, drawing everyone's attention. "We need to address the elephant in the room," she began, her tone icy. "Ryan's relationship with this Emily Johnson." Ryan set his fork down, his jaw tightening. "Sophie, don't." But she pressed on. "This isn't just about you, Ryan. It's about our family's reputation, our business. You've put everything at risk for someone who doesn't belong in our world." Their father, sitting at the head of the table, raised an eyebrow. "Risk? From what I've seen, she's handled herself with grace." Sophie turned to him, incredulous. "You're defending her?" He nodded. "The public respects authenticity. If anything, Ryan's shown better judgment than you have with this tabloid nonsense." Sophie's face flushed, but she didn't back down. "She's a liability. And if Ryan won't see that, then—" Ryan cut her off, his voice calm but firm. "Then what, Sophie? You'll destroy her? You've tried, and look where it got you. It's over. Let it go." The room fell silent. Sophie's gaze darted around, searching for allies, but none came to her defense. Defeated, she stood abruptly and left the room. Ryan exhaled, relieved but wary. He had won this battle, but he knew the war wasn't over yet. The morning after the tense family dinner, Ryan woke up feeling lighter. Sophie's retreat was a small but significant victory. However, he knew the road ahead wouldn't be without challenges. As he sipped his coffee, he drafted a message to Emily. "I stood up to Sophie last night. I meant what I said. I'm not letting her or anyone else come between us. Let me know when you're ready to talk." Meanwhile, Emily was preparing for another shift at the airport. She saw Ryan's message but hesitated to reply. The article had given her a sense of empowerment, but the public attention still made her wary. At work, the support from her colleagues continued to surprise her. "You're kind of a local hero now," one of them joked as they restocked supplies. Emily laughed, shaking her head. "Hardly. I'm just trying to survive like everyone else." As her shift ended, she found herself pulling out her phone and rereading Ryan's message. Finally, she typed back, "Let's talk after work." When they met later that evening, Emily felt a mix of nerves and relief. Ryan greeted her with his usual warmth, but there was a seriousness in his eyes. "I want you to know I'm all in," he said, taking her hands. "But I need to know if you are too. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it." Emily took a deep breath, the weight of her doubts lifting slightly. "I don't know what the future looks like, Ryan, but I want to try." His smile lit up the room. "That's all I need." Sophie sat alone in her penthouse, the city skyline glittering through the windows. For the first time in years, she felt a pang of doubt. Her father's words from the dinner replayed in her mind. The public respects authenticity. She had always believed that control and perception were everything, but Emily's resilience had shattered that illusion. On her desk lay a stack of reports from her PR team, detailing the positive feedback from Emily's article. Investors had even commented on how Ryan's defense of her showed strength and leadership. Still, Sophie couldn't fully let go of her reservations. Her instinct to protect the family legacy ran deep, and part of her still saw Emily as a potential risk. Later that day, she called Ryan. When he answered, she spoke carefully. "I need to say something." "Go on," he replied, his tone guarded. "I was wrong," Sophie admitted reluctantly. "About Emily, about the way I handled things. I thought I was protecting us, but I made things worse." Ryan was silent for a moment before saying, "I never expected to hear that from you." "Don't get used to it," she said dryly. "But I'll back off. Just don't make me regret it." "You won't," Ryan assured her. After they hung up, Sophie stared at her reflection in the window. For once, she wasn't sure if she'd won or lost, but perhaps that didn't matter anymore. The air between Ryan and Emily felt lighter, but they both knew the road ahead required effort. That evening, they met at a small, quiet cafe in Brooklyn, a world away from Manhattan's glitz. Emily sipped her coffee, her gaze steady on Ryan. "I need to be honest. All of this, the attention, the gossip, it's been overwhelming. But I don't want to run anymore." Ryan nodded, his voice soft but firm. "I understand, and I'll do whatever it takes to make this work. Emily, you don't have to carry this alone." She smiled faintly. "I've spent so long trying to be strong for everyone else. It's hard to let someone in." "Then let me earn it," Ryan said. "One step at a time." They talked late into the evening, sharing stories and laughter that felt easy and real. For the first time in weeks, Emily felt a flicker of hope that their relationship could withstand the challenges ahead. As they walked back to Emily's apartment, Ryan paused outside her door. "I'm not perfect, Emily. I'll make mistakes, but I'll never stop fighting for us." She looked at him, her heart full of both fear and faith. "I believe you, Ryan. Let's see where this goes." That night, as she lay in bed, Emily realized she was finally allowing herself to hope, not just for her family, but for her own happiness too. Sophie sat in the Mitchell Hotel's boardroom, watching a presentation unfold. For once, she wasn't focused on controlling the narrative or outmaneuvering someone. Instead, she was reflecting on her role within the family and the business. Her father had always valued her sharp instincts and drive, but his recent praise for Ryan's actions had unsettled her. Perhaps she had been too rigid, too focused on perfection at the expense of authenticity. After the meeting, her father approached her. "You've been quiet, Sophie. That's not like you." She offered a small smile. "Just thinking about how we've done things, how I've done things. Maybe I've been too focused on protecting what we've built instead of letting it evolve." He raised an eyebrow. "You're admitting fault? That's new." "Don't push it," she said, though her tone held a trace of humor. "But yes, I've made mistakes. Ryan's right about one thing. People respect honesty. Maybe it's time I learned to respect it too." Her father nodded, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. "It's never too late to grow, Sophie. Remember that." Later that evening, Sophie reviewed the latest reports on their business ventures, her mind clearer than it had been in years. She still had reservations about Emily, but for now, she was willing to let things play out. Maybe, just maybe, Ryan's way wasn't so wrong after all. Emily's life began to find a rhythm again, though it was far from simple. Balancing her responsibilities at work, caring for her mom, and navigating her growing relationship with Ryan was a juggling act. But for the first time in a long while, she felt like she wasn't doing it alone. Ryan had started visiting her in Brooklyn more often, insisting that he wanted to understand her world. "You keep saying we're from different worlds," he'd told her one evening. "Maybe it's time we blend them." Emily appreciated his efforts, though she was still wary of how their relationship would affect her family. Danny, however, had fully embraced Ryan's presence, often chatting with him about college plans and even asking for advice on scholarships. One evening after dinner, Ryan offered to help clean up. As they stood side by side at the sink, Emily turned to him. "You don't have to keep proving yourself, you know." "I'm not proving anything," he said, handing her a plate to dry. "I'm just here." His words settled into her heart, and she realized how much she'd come to rely on his steady presence. Still, there were moments of doubt. At work, she overheard co-workers speculating about how long the rich guy would stick around. And in quieter moments, she wondered if she was strong enough to keep bridging the gap between their worlds. But every time she saw Ryan, his determination to make it work gave her the strength to keep trying. Months later, Emily found herself standing on the rooftop of Ryan's Manhattan apartment, looking out at the city skyline. It was their first anniversary, and Ryan had insisted on celebrating it quietly, just the two of them. Hard to believe it's been a year, Ryan said, handing her a glass of champagne. Emily laughed softly. Feels like a lifetime. They clinked glasses, and Ryan took her hand, his expression turning serious. Emily, I know this hasn't been easy for either of us, but I want you to know how much I admire you. Your strength, your honesty, it's changed me. Her cheeks flushed, and she looked down. I've learned a lot from you two. I've spent so long trying to do everything on my own, but you've shown me it's okay to let someone in. They stood in silence for a moment, the city lights twinkling around them. Then Ryan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Emily's breath caught. Ryan. He opened it to reveal a simple but elegant ring. I'm not asking for an answer tonight, he said softly. I just want you to know that whenever you're ready, I am too. Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded, her voice trembling. Thank you, Ryan, for everything. As they embraced, Emily felt a sense of hope she hadn't thought possible a year ago. Their worlds might be different, but together, they had created one that was uniquely theirs. Enjoy the story. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Share your thoughts in the comments and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next thrilling episode. See you in our next video. Take care.